now.
I've just come back from Parliament, where I've announced the next phase of our economic support. My main message today is this: our economic plan is evolving because the situation is evolving. In March, we hoped we were facing a temporary period of disruption. What's now clear, as the Prime Minister and our scientific advisors have said, is that for at least the next 6 months, the virus and restrictions are going to be a fact of our lives. So, as our economy and labour market adapts and evolves to this new normal, our plan needs to adapt and evolve as well. What does this mean in practice? Well, today I've announced 5 new measures. We're protecting jobs through the new Jobs Support Scheme. The government will directly support the wages of people in work, giving businesses who face depressed demand through the difficult winter months the option of keeping employees in a job on shorter hours, rather than making them redundant. We're also extending the self-employed scheme to sit alongside that. And I've announced a range of measures to ease cash flow concerns for businesses, allowing them to focus on protecting jobs. Pay as you grow will ease the repayment terms for bounce-back loans. We're giving people more time to pay back their deferred taxes, and I'm cancelling the planned increase in VAT for hospitality and tourism through to the end of March. I know people are anxious and afraid right now, but I want them to know that we have a plan to protect jobs and support businesses. And what was true at the beginning of this crisis remains true. It's on all of us to get through this together. Thank you. Look forward to taking some questions from the media. I think we're going to start with Laura from Koonsberg from the BBC. Laura, are you there?
I am. Thank you very much, Chancellor. You have admitted that many people are very worried at the moment. How many jobs do you think this scheme can save with all the measures you've outlined? And you say you only want to help support jobs that are viable. Can you outline which jobs you believe will no longer be viable because of the pandemic?
Thanks, Laura. Look, it's impossible for me to predict, given the uncertainty, the exact shape of the labour market. As I've said, I can't save every job and I can't protect every single business. And I think when we started the furlough scheme, it was a surprise to everybody, economic commentators alike, the scale of the take-up of that. 9 million people had their jobs protected through the furlough scheme, for example. But my expectation and hope is that this new scheme will be able to benefit large numbers of people and help protect their jobs through the difficult winter months, especially as demand is depressed in their companies. You asked about viability. Now, it's not for me to sit here and make pronouncements upon exactly what job is viable and not, but what we do need to do is evolve our support now that we're through the acute phase of the crisis and make sure that where we are putting that support, we're doing it where it can make the most difference. And I believe it is the right thing to do to concentrate that support on jobs which have a genuine prospect of being viable and providing long-term security for those employees. And the way we can do that is through the test, where employees have to be working a minimum amount of time, and that wasn't a feature of the furlough scheme where people could be at home the entire time. That's a change in this scheme, and that's the way to think about viability. Okay, I think next are we going to the ITV, and Joel?
Yeah, hello there, Chancellor. The new job support scheme is far less generous. Employers are doing the heavy lifting. Do you really think there's a powerful incentive for them to hold on to staff?
Joel, it's definitely different to the furlough scheme. You're absolutely right. It's more targeted, and I think that's right. I think as we've now in a different phase of this crisis, we can act in a more targeted way to support those businesses who really need our help. So, for example, larger businesses on this scheme will have to demonstrate that their revenues are falling as a result of what's happening to them. So that's something that we've changed again, which will change who's eligible for it, which I think is a sensible and right thing to do because we're putting large sums of taxpayer money behind this. And in terms of generosity, I think actually what this scheme does is demonstrate that there is a partnership because of the time that people are not working. If you think about that cost, that burden, that is shared equally between the employer, the government, and the employee themselves. And I think that's a very fair way to approach this. We're all in this together, and that's the right way that this scheme should operate. And I think the last thing I'd say is you can use this scheme in conjunction with the jobs retention bonus that we put in place in the summer. And if you look at the combined impact of those, I think it provides a very significant cash incentive for businesses to retain their staff, even if that means on reduced hours. Next, we're going to Sky and Ed Conway.
Hi, Chancellor. The Prime Minister told us today that no one should be penalised for doing the right thing when it comes to COVID-19. I just wonder, what's your message for those thousands, millions perhaps, of employees who are being penalised by your restrictions and who won't be helped out by your new scheme?
I think, Ed, I think it's wrong to talk about people being penalised for the restrictions. I think, look, we have to have these restrictions, all of us collectively together, because that's the only way and the best way to suppress the spread of this virus. And in the end, that's the best way to protect all of us. So I don't view them quite in the same way. But you're right, we don't want people to be disadvantaged as best we can by what's happening, which is why we've put in place, I think, incredibly generous improvements to our welfare system through the increases in universal credit, the local housing allowance, which helps people with their rental payments if they need it. We created a hardship fund for local authorities for those of their vulnerable citizens who are struggling with council tax payments. So I think we've put in place a range of things to help the most vulnerable. And most recently, for those who are being told to isolate because of the track and trace system, they, if they need, will have access to a £500 payment to help tide them through that if their earnings are going to see a significant disruption and they need that extra assistance. So I think that demonstrates our commitment to make good on that pledge. We want people to be supported to do the right thing, and throughout all of this, we want to make sure that we protect the most vulnerable in our society. I think next we're going to Channel 4. Is that right? Helio, are you there? Hello?
Yes, thank you, Chancellor. I'd really like to pin you down on this question of viability, because people at home will be very anxious about whether their jobs are viable. I mean, we spoke to a sandwich shop owner yesterday who's been in the city for 40 years. I wonder, Chancellor, if you would encourage that shop owner to keep his staff on, despite the fact that trading has gone down 90% since people were told to work from home. Do you think jobs like those, where trading has fallen off completely, are those jobs still viable?
Well, I think, Healy, as I said, it's not for me to sit here and make pronouncements on every individual job. What I want to be able to do is provide as much support as possible, given the constraints that we operate in. We obviously can't sustain the same level of things that we were doing at the beginning of this crisis, but nor would it right to do so either, because the situation has evolved. This is now something, as I said earlier, we know is going to be a fact of our lives for a while to come, and that means the economy is going to change and adapt. I can't promise that everyone can go back to the job that they used to have, and that's why, in the summer, we outlined a range of measures to help people find new opportunities. So, for example, we've increased our investment in apprenticeships. We've created the Kickstart scheme. All of that is designed to help people find a new future if the job that they used to have is not one that is going to be there for them now, despite the considerable support we've put in place to try and protect as many of those jobs as possible. Next to Channel 5 and Andy Bell. Andy, good afternoon.
Afternoon, Chancellor. The fact is there are still some big sectors of the economy which are absolutely restricted and having terrible difficulties because of restrictions put in by the government. Hospitality is obviously the one that comes to mind. You did have the choice to have the furlough scheme in specific sectors. You've decided not to. People are absolutely clear that there will be jobs lost in areas like hospitality. Are those, as a result of your decision, are those jobs that are going to be lost just the price that now has to be paid for, as you would put it, adapting to the government's response to this pandemic?
Andy, you talk about hospitality rightly, because it's an industry that's been particularly affected by what's happened over the last few months and continues to be effective. I think it's probably worth reminding ourselves about what we have done for that industry. So everyone in that industry is not paying any business rates whatsoever this year. That's a significant part of a business's cash flow. We've also provided those businesses with cash grants of £10,000 or £25,000, something that was not available for other industries and has made an enormous difference to almost 1 million small and medium-sized businesses. Obviously, we had the initiatives over the summer to help try and catalyse demand in that industry, and the VAT cut from 20% to 5%, which is worth billions of pounds of support to that industry. And obviously, I announced today that that VAT cut, which was meant to expire in January, will be pushed out through to the spring at the end of March. So I think that represents a considerable amount of support for that industry at what is, I appreciate, a very difficult time. And they will also be able to make use of this new scheme. I think for most people in that industry, they're open and they're operating, but they are having depressed demand. And the scheme that I've outlined today, the job support scheme, is designed to deal with exactly that situation. It helps them reduce their employees' hours. We all chip in to make up some of the difference, and the job can be saved and no one has to be let go. So I think it can help. Next, we go to Times Radio and Tom Newton-Dunn.
Good afternoon, Chancellor.
Hi, Tom.
Hi. You've been very honest in wanting to level with the British public. Perhaps you continue to do so. Can you say with any surety that unemployment won't go over 4 million during this pandemic? And talking directly to the people who will lose their jobs, okay, you don't want to put a number on it, but can you say to them that your interventions are enough to get them back into new work by Christmas? And if not Christmas, then when?
Well, Tom, I think I would be lying if I could try and give you precise numbers or timeframes for what's going to happen when. We're dealing with unprecedented economic uncertainty. That's not just me who would say that. I think it would be most economic commentators and forecasters. Of course, unemployment is already rising and will continue to rise. That's a complete tragedy. We've already lost 700,000 jobs. Those people's security is now under threat, which is why I'm doing absolutely everything I can. It remains my #1 priority to protect, support and create jobs wherever I can across the economy. Not going to be able to save every job, but I think the interventions we made in the summer to create new jobs. We talked about the Kickstart scheme before. That's a landmark programme to provide job placements for young people who are at risk of long-term unemployment. That will be up and running very shortly. Applications are already coming in. Those young people will start their new jobs in weeks, in the coming months. There will be 250,000 of them over the next year. So some of the actions we've taken are already starting to bear fruit. We're increasing the capacity of our job centres. We've invested in new apprentices at a time where it's difficult. So look, we're throwing everything at it. Things are already happening, but there's a lot of difficult times to come. But I want people to be reassured that we will keep focusing on this. It remains my #1 priority. If we go to the Financial Times and Delphine.
Hello. Chancellor, you've underlined the need for the support measures to evolve as the situation evolves. Are you still prepared to scale up these measures if, as seems very likely now, we're going to see tougher restrictions over the next couple of months?
I think, Delphine, first of all, we've just announced all the measures. So I think that it's important that we let them take hold and implement them. And actually, we're acting in advance of what we know will be a difficult winter economy. I think we know the coming months are going to be tricky, and that's why we've acted with speed. We've been working on these plans for a while. Now was the right time to outline them. They will come into force imminently and make a real difference to businesses on the ground. So I hope you'll be reassured by that, and people can be reassured by that we always stand ready to do what's necessary. I've been consistent throughout this crisis that this is an unprecedented situation. It demands a bold response, it demands rapid responses, and it demands creative responses because we haven't dealt with things like this before. So we're going to try new things. I think the job support scheme is an example of that. That's something that has never been tried at this scale in the UK labour market before, and I believe it will make a genuine difference to people's prospects. But if you're asking me if I'm ready to do more as a situation evolves, of course I am, and that's what we have been doing, and that's what we will continue to do as we get through the winter and through to next year. think next to the Daily Mail, Ruth Sutherland. Ruth, are you there?
I'm here. Yes. Good afternoon, Chancellor.
Hi.
Obviously, it's entirely right that we support jobs and we support businesses at this hugely difficult time. But how are you going to pay the bill in the long term?
Ruth, I'm delighted that you asked that question, and it's really important. Of course, at the moment, we're providing a lot of support. We can't continue to provide the same degree of support that we did at the beginning of this crisis and sustain it at that level. It's simply not, it's not affordable and not sustainable for a prolonged period of time, which is now, we've evolved the situation. The economy is reopening, things are growing again, albeit from a low base. And that's why we are now doing support in a more targeted way, concentrating it on where it can make the most difference, because we have to be mindful of the cost of all of these things. I think everyone is cognizant of what we have done, the scale of what we have done. The situation would have been worse if we hadn't done that. So I think in the long term, it's the right thing to do to have acted in the way we have and to continue providing support to the economy as we go through this difficult winter time. But you're right, over time and as the economy recovers, we absolutely need to have an eye on our public finances and to make sure that we're in a strong and sustainable position. And it's only because of the decisions that were taken before I had this job by previous chancellors that our public finances were in a strong position. And I pay tribute to my predecessors for making those difficult decisions. That's what enabled me to react in this particular way. It reminds us of the importance of repairing public finances, having a strong economy, so that when problems like this come along, you can throw a lot at them. But I will obviously have to make similar difficult decisions in the future as we get on a path back to sustainability. But right now, the priority is supporting the economy, throwing everything we've got at protecting people's jobs, and that's what I will continue to do. Next, to the Times and Phil Aldrich. Phil, good afternoon.
Afternoon, Chancellor. Capital Economics have come up with an estimate of about £5 billion for the cost of these interventions today. I just wondered if you had a more accurate estimate of the cost of these schemes.
Yeah, we'll publish full costings later in the autumn, and the OBR, the Office for Budget Responsibility, who are the independent watchdog, will cost all of these things, so there'll be full transparency and disclosure about that, as is normal, and you'll be familiar with that process. I think roughly the VAT cut will cost about £800 million, and that comes on top of the existing estimated cost of about £2.5 billion, which is the cost of the VAT cut from when we announced it through to January, and £800 million for the extension. So that's £3.5 billion of total support for hospitality through that measure alone. I think some of the loan deferrals and tax deferrals are slightly complicated to cost, and we can take that offline and I can walk you through it, but the OBR will do all of those, because what we're doing there is deferring payments in that way. And then obviously the most important thing, the job support scheme, it's very tricky to be precise about exactly how much that will cost, because we don't know the exact take-up. But if I walk you through some rough maths, we know that someone on the furlough scheme today, on average, makes about £1,400 a month. Now, if that same person was put on the short-time working scheme, on the job support scheme, and were only working a third of their hours, so getting the maximum support from government, that would cost about £300 a month. So if you scale that up, that would be just over £300 million per million per month. But that assumes that they're only working a third of the time. Clearly, many people will be working more than that, and that assumes the average wages are the same as the current population of our furloughed workers. This scheme is obviously open to everyone, even if they haven't used the furlough scheme before. So we can't be precise, but hopefully that gives you a kind of sense of scale and magnitude. Great. I think next to the Mirror, Lizzie Buchan.
Thank you, Chancellor.
Hi, Lizzie.
Hi. The Prime Minister has been clear that further restrictions may be necessary if people don't obey the new rules. Has the Treasury modelled the economic impact of a second national lockdown? And would you support such a measure if the Chief Scientific Advisor and the Chief Medical Officer called for it?
Yeah, I completely agree with the Prime Minister on our approach to tackling the virus. I think, of course, do any of us like these restrictions? No, of course we don't. And we love our lives to be back to normal. We know that's not possible now and for a while. And we all need to do our bit to suppress the spread of this virus. And when you think about it from an economic perspective, the Prime Minister talks about a stitch in time saves 9, and he's right. We take the measures that we've taken earlier this week to prevent us from having to do much more difficult things in the future. And, our hope and confidence is that these measures will do exactly that. But it would be wrong for me to stand here and tell you I can predict exactly how this is going to go. And we've said very clearly, rightly, that if we need to put in place more restrictions, we will have to do that to keep the virus under control. But as I said, if the measures that we've announced earlier this week have their desired effect, then we can carry on as we are. No one wants to have to close things down. What we want to do is try and live our lives as normally as possible, but controlling the spread of this virus, and we're constantly going to be trying to get that balance right. But that, in the long term, is in the best interest of the economy, as the Prime Minister said, and I fully agree with him on that. Next, I think we're Paul at the Huffington Post.
Hi, Chancellor. Now, your Eat Out to Help Out scheme has been incredibly popular, but some scientists are saying it may have unwittingly led to a spread of the virus. Did you receive any behavioural modelling from SAGE beforehand on the possible impact on COVID? And if not, would you regret that?
I think, Paul, in terms of the spread of the virus, if you see what's happening in our country, as you've heard from our scientific advisors, we're following similar paths to other countries in Europe. For example, France and Spain, Belgium, we know, has dealt with this before. So I think it's probably simplistic to look at any one thing. What's happening here is similar to what's happening in many other countries. And of course, there are lots of things going on at the same time towards the last few weeks, and as we get into a season for respiratory illnesses. So there's going to be lots of different factors at play as to why the virus is acting in the way that it is. But more broadly, I don't think it's the wrong thing for the government or indeed people to want to try and get their lives back to normal. I said in the summer that we'll have to learn to live with the uncertainty of the moment, and that's what we're all going to have to do. We all want to live life as normally as possible, recognising that that's going to be an iterative process as we learn and adjust and make sure that we're always controlling the virus. So I think it's right that we strive for normalcy, but right that we recognise that there are going to be limits on that and adjust them as is necessary. Next to The Guardian and Larry Elliott.
Afternoon, Chancellor.
Hi, Larry.
Hi. I just want to ask you a question about business reaction to this. And if you're an employer, you're going to go from paying 20% of an employee's wages under the furlough scheme to 55% under the job support scheme. Britain has a very flexible labour market. Isn't there a risk that businesses are going to simply just lay people off and then re-employ them part-time as and when or if demand picks up? Because you're quite aware that demand is quite fragile. If you're an employer, isn't there an incentive for you to go down that route rather than take part in the scheme, in which case unemployment is going to go up a lot over the coming months?
Larry, I think if you looked at your numbers that you talked about, the 20% going to 55, the big difference in those numbers is if you were only paying 20%, that was because your employee was not doing any work at all for you. So yes, is the company going to be paying more now? They are, because that's on the basis that their employee is actually working a much larger chunk of the time. So I think the thing to look at it is, obviously, for the time an employee is working, it's right that their company pays them their full regular wage. And for the time they're not working, that's the bit that is split equally between the company, the employee and the government in a fair sharing of that. And I actually think if you look at that combined with the impact of the job retention bonus, it provides a very significant incentive for businesses to retain the staff that they had on furlough and bring them back. And more generally, I think most companies want to invest in their people. If you've got long-term relationships with your employees, you don't want to let them go, right? You've got a difficult winter period coming up, demand is reduced, right? You kind of feel that you'll be able to get through it at the other end, you'll be there at the other end of it, but you need some help to get through, and you don't want to let people go. You don't want to lose all the skills they have, the knowledge of your business, and that's what this scheme will do. It will help those employers talk to their employees, not lay them off, but through reduced hours and support from the government, keep them there through the difficult period, so that they're there to at the end of it, and the employer has not lost all of that talent. So I think it really will make a difference. And I know many companies have called for a scheme exactly like this, and I'm glad it's been warmly welcomed by people like the CBI and the British Chambers of Commerce and other business groups who recognise that this is exactly the kind of scheme that will support them to protect jobs and of their valued employees and get through the difficult winter months. Right, next, I think, to the Daily Telegraph and Gordon Rayner. Gordon, hi.
Thank you, Chancellor. You said earlier on that the damage to the economy is now permanent. So in an era where the private sector is having to make huge cutbacks to deal with the economic impact of the decisions the government has made, should the state not also become smaller to do its bit?
I think, Gordon, I'm not sure if I said the damage was permanent. I think what I said was because obviously the virus is going to be a fact of our lives for at least the next 6 months. That slightly means that our economic approach to it needs to evolve, and I think that was the point I was trying to make there. Whereas I think in March, if you contrast that, we hoped that this would be something that would be a temporary disruption to the economy. Obviously, the way things have gone, this is, as I said, going to be with us for a while to come. So it's right that the support adjusts. Look, in terms of what's the role for the state, there's two things. One, at a situation like this, a time like this, it's right that the state steps in to provide the support that we have done to people around the country and the businesses that employ them, and indeed our public services. I mean, we're dealing with something of an unprecedented scale in how many people it affects. It affects the whole country, the severity with which it affects them, and indeed it's the state that's putting in place restrictions on all of our activity in order to suppress the virus to our collective benefit. So I think that does mean the state has a slightly different role to play, versus peacetime, if you want to make that analogy. But going forward, and you ask about, I think if you're talking about the size of government, and I think there what I would say is, look, I agree with you. I think that obviously the state being able to be as nimble and agile as possible means it doesn't have to raise as much tax revenue from people, and people can keep more of the money that they earn rather than having to hand it over for things. That is in general a good thing, right? We have to pay for the services that we want, but obviously, better that people keep more of their own money. But as we get through this, we can get back to a more normal situation where we go back to ordinary business, and that's where we'll get to. But in the short term, it's right that we act in the way that we do. It's right that we provide the support that we have. That's for all our benefit, and it means that the economy actually will be stronger and bounce back faster when we get through to the other side. I think next, The Sun and Matt Dathan. Matt, are you there?
Yes, I am. What's your message to people still on full-time furlough? Would you tell them it's now time to look for another job, start a business, or just wait and hope their firm survives the winter? And in August, you were very clear what we could all do to help the economy, our local businesses, eat out and help out. What about now, given that Chris Whitty is telling us to avoid unnecessary contact?
Matt, for those that are on furlough, I'd say, well, the good news is, first of all, that we have seen millions of people come back from furlough into work. And I think that's something that we should take a moment to reflect on. And that's very good news. 9 million people at the peak were on furlough, having their jobs protected. Over half of them are already back at work. And we're down to about 1 in 10 of the labour force, something around that level, which are still on the furlough scheme, but are able to start working. Obviously, we want as many of those people to get back to work as possible. I hope they feel reassured that we're trying to make that a reality through things like the job retention bonus, where we're providing their employer with a significant cash bonus if they're able to bring them back. And even now on a part-time basis, on fewer hours, using the support from the job support scheme, we're making it as easy as possible for companies in a way that we can to bring those last remaining team members back into their workplaces. In terms of what we can all do now, what's the best thing we can do to help? I like your idea of people starting up businesses. That's great. We have startup loan scheme, so people should have a look at that if they're interested in that. What can we do now? The best thing we can do now is follow the guidelines. And the Prime Minister, I think, made a really compelling and passionate statement on Tuesday explaining where we were and the role that we all have to play. And if we all, can do what we need to do, we can suppress the spread of this virus. And it means that we can then protect as much of our economy as possible. And that ultimately is the only long-run sustainable way to create new jobs, or indeed protect the ones that we've had. Is ultimately we need a functioning economy with businesses that are doing what they do. So if we can do that and get on the back of this, then I think we're in good shape, and we see early signs of progress. Right, from a low base, GDP is starting to grow again. We've got economic growth coming back. Retail sales are recovering. So we saw that already, and if we can just follow these new set of restrictions, make it work, then I think we can look forward with cautious optimism. But it's going to be a difficult few months, and that's why we've acted today to provide a considerable amount of extra support to get through that winter period. And I think lastly to Bloomberg and Alex.
Thank you very much, Chancellor. Hundreds of thousands of self-employed people missed out, fell between the cracks of your earlier schemes earlier this year, and they look set to miss out again. What's your message to those people? Is it that they should abandon the careers they've built for themselves and seek alternative work? And if I might just push you on jobs, you've said you can't protect every jobs. A responsible Treasury must have done modelling. How many jobs do you expect to go over coming months?
So, Alex, on your first point around self-employed, I think it's probably worth bearing in mind, I think the support that we've put in place for self-employed has been more generous, more comprehensive, and now, as a result of the announcements today, more long-lasting than I think pretty much any country anywhere around the world. And it's benefited around 2.5 million people who are running self-employed small businesses. So I think that's the first thing to say. So I'm proud that we've done that, and I know what a difference it has made. It means that 95% of people who are majority self-employed receive support. Now, obviously, in the past, we have not been able to extend that to people who we don't know about because they've never filed a tax return. Obviously, there's no possible way for us to judge exactly what they've earned, what kind of support they deserve, and that's why we made the decisions we did at the time. But that's notwithstanding the announcements today, there will be significant support for that population already and into the future. And to your last point, I don't, and I can point you to independent forecasters like the Bank of England or the Office for Budget Responsibility, and look, their forecasts don't make for good reading, right? They're forecasting unemployment to go up to high single digits by the end of the year, right? That is a tragedy, but it's not that that's something that's coming. It's already starting to happen. Almost 750,000 people have already lost their job as a result of what's happening to our economy, and that's why it's my number one priority. That's why from the beginning of this crisis, I've been determined to try and protect as many people's jobs as possible. That's why we introduced the furlough scheme. That's why in the summer, as our economy was reopening, I announced the £30 billion plan for jobs to support, create and protect jobs across the United Kingdom, particularly for young people, with initiatives like our Kickstart scheme, which is getting going. And that's why today, to help businesses get through the difficult winter period, we've announced the Job Support Scheme, a radical new policy to help protect as many jobs as possible by chipping in together with an employer to allow them to keep people on part-time work rather than laying them off. So all of this stuff put together, I think, shows you how committed I am and the government is to trying to do everything we can protect as many jobs as possible, especially now at what will be a difficult few months. But I'm confident that we will get through it, and we will get through it together. Thank you very much.
See the headlines as they happen and watch BBC News live in the app and get the full story with bbc.co.uk/news. Follow the story for all the latest with BBC News.